Today in Discipline 101, it's a bit of a crash course as we consider everything about discipline. Discipline comes from the word disciple, and of course, the word disciple means that we are following suit. And so, as we really try and tackle in a very short space of time today, all different things that could be happening in terms of your kids' behavior, whether it's your kids in the classroom or your own children in your own house, we must be mindful again that we are the ones who set the tone, create the environment, create the space, and need to lead by example. So let's not waste any time. There's lots to discuss. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get going. What better way to try and understand behavior other than just going off to the dictionary and asking the dictionary what is the definition? So we see it's a noun, and it's explained as the way in which an animal or person behaves in response to a particular situation or a stimulus. Plurals for behaviors obviously behaves, and of course there are all these different spellings. And so yes, maybe we need to just go a little bit further on that. What is behave? So behave has to do with an action resulting on a decision we have made. And this decision that we make, we've arrived at because of the information that we've been given and through the past experiences, our past experiences and the perceptions that I have around whatever's going on. And so during this little time together, we're going to be just chatting about this and doing our best to understand why it is that we see what we deem in people as positive or negative behaviors. Let's go into this in a little bit more depth. So how do I find out about my environment? Well, that is through the sensations that I experience and the information coming in through my ears, my eyes, and my nose, through the nervous system, up the spine, to the brain, and let's say I have a very good feeling about what it is that's happening. I am feeling positive. I am happy. I'm content. I'm even excited about the situation that I find myself in. So excitement is a really important one, because when we're excited and enthusiastic, it's a big emotion that tells the brain, which doesn't speak a language, as much as we like to think the brain is a language brain. Yes, parts of it do use language, but the most important part of the brain, the subconscious, doesn't really use language. It uses emotion, it uses pictures, and it uses movement. And so as I tell this brain that I'm in a safe space, I can respond. I have the time to take it in, I have the time to consider, and I have the time to make a decision as to how it is that I'm going to move forward here. And so this offers me the opportunity to move, to connect, and of course to learn. So if I'm able to move, I'm really able to move forwards towards things that I enjoy. I can move backwards when I'm a little bit more apprehensive, or I could move forwards to see the details of what is happening, or step backwards to see the bigger picture. I have permission to move out of the way for things that might be a little bit dangerous, but I have the space to move within my space, within my environment. And this moving isn't just a physical moving. It's almost the permission to be, to exist, to participate, to engage, to be inspired and involved. And as I do this, I can connect not only to the things that I'm learning, but also to the people in my environment, which is so important. We as humans are not born and are just able to walk. We are very reliant on mom and dad to provide us with food and warmth and shelter. And so this is why children find it very, very stressful when the parents do not respond to them with facial expressions when they are babies. They need to know that they are emotionally safe, that they are in a supportive environment, that they have older people and mentors and other people in this environment that they can lean on when they need guidance or help. And so we are a very sociable being that absolutely thrives when we have good relationships and people that we trust. And this safe space allows us the place or the space and again, it's not a physical space, this emotional space to explore, knowing that I can make a mistake without being rejected or punished for it. I can play with new concepts. I allow myself to be a novice first, because of course when I want to try something new, it's going to be intimidating and frightening, and I don't need to worry about if I can really be an expert yet, because as I'm learning new concepts, as I say, I have got the safe space to pretend, to try on, to use trial and error, to really understand how it is that this concept that I'm learning fits in. Think about you learning to walk, how you were so inspired and the reward of walking was so great, and every time you fell, you weren't punished or shouted at, but rather you were praised and you were helped up, and you were encouraged to continue to persevere. And this allowed you to be curious, to question, to ask, to seek. And of course, these are all, in my mind, really good synonyms for learning. So what happens if the body somehow has got the message that it is in danger? And so, yes, the brain lives in a dark skull. It can't see for itself, it can't hear for itself. No, it is actually relying on the stimulation or the stimulus, like we heard about earlier, on in the environment to really give it this kind of information. And as we feel things in our body, as we see things, as we hear things, and all this information arrives at the brain, connected with the emotion in the time or in that moment, so the brain can make a better decision. And so, as I say, the body is using all of the information coming in through the nervous system. I love this picture because, as you understand, it's going from the spine up, it passes the heart. And so the emotion that we're experiencing things with is incredibly important, and it's making its way up to the decision maker organ. So in this case, perhaps something happened that was very scary for this person. Maybe something happened and they've had something similar happen in the past, and in the past they survived by moving into this very alert and hyper-vigilant stage. And now the brain has got the message, I need to defend myself. And so I'm not going to respond in this case, I'm going to react. And because I'm in danger, I need to react quickly. And this means I'm going to actually be pulling on past brain patterns that have helped me in the past, so that I don't have to now, take a step back, make a decision, because let's face it, if we're in a very dangerous spot, we need to respond quickly. The lion isn't going to wait for us to reason with the situation as to what would be, calculate the statistics, how many people survive a lion attack, how many people. This is something we've got to act very quickly on. And so I'm given 3 options here. Either if I'm strong enough and I feel I'm up to the challenge, I might fight whatever is standing in front of me. If I do not have the resources, well, then I'm going to get out of there. I'm not Samson. I haven't fought off any lions before. And so it's probably best that I run and climb a tree and hope that this lion isn't very good at climbing trees. Well, if those 2 options aren't available, well, then I best stand still, hold my breath, and play possum, play dead. Breathing would be moving, and that would give away the fact that I'm, a living being that could probably be quite tasty. And so I'm absolutely going to stand still and, of course, hope that this danger passes by. And when I'm safe, then I can breathe a sigh of relief, and then I'm free to move again as normal. And so as we push children or people, or as people feel anxious, so if we shift into this very scary space where on some level we've been told we're in danger, whether that be the response of the people in the situation, the words that they're using, their body language, or if it be a automatic movement called a primitive reflex that is getting triggered by a loud noise or by somebody touching your arm, and then the body feels like it's in a very dangerous place, well, that's all going to add to how this information coming in is perceived. And so if I'm in the flight response, I'm going to be very defensive. I'm going to be very protective of myself, maybe very possessive. And I'm going to act aggressively as I lash out. And quite physically, we can see as I lash out on a very physical level, I'm trying to protect myself. I'm using my arms and legs, which is, it's instinct. Let's say, for instance, I don't feel I can do that. Well, then I'm going to avoid. And this could be children literally standing up and walking out of the class, running away. I've had children in my classroom climbing under the table. I could just not do the work. If I can't move and I don't feel I can do the work that has been given to me, I might not even try the work. And then, of course, our little classroom clowns are very clever because they get attention and they get to waste the teacher's time so that their time runs out before they ever get to that point where they actually have to do what they don't believe they can. And so, if I can't fight the danger, whatever I've perceived that danger to be, if I can't avoid the danger, well then, as I say, I need to freeze. And this is where the shutdown comes in. Again, as I just chat a little bit about those reflexes, so interesting because we see the very two first reflexes, these primitive reflexes that we talk about coming into this world, have to do with freezing, the fear paralysis reflex. So I'm literally paralyzed by fear, or the morrow, which then links quite nicely with this fight or flight behavior. In the head, we also see this type of behavior sitting at our temporals, which are very close to the part of the brain called the amygdala. And of course, we should know, if we haven't before heard of these big interesting names, the amygdala has to do with this fight or flight, this am I safe or am I in danger response. So the following information I've gotten from Dr. John Martini from a podcast on the Next Level Soul. Quite an interesting conversation, and of course I filtered this, and we're going to talk about filtering, but I filtered this according to my own questions and my own reality. And while he was talking about the fact that he did much work on the secret and manifestations and quantum physics, as I say, this really struck home for me, and I want to share it with you. And so we have got so much information, if you can understand, as we look at our little body, so many nerves to pick up on it. Hey, we are experiencing at any given moment gravity pulling on us. We're experiencing ourselves responding to that. We're experiencing this absolute bombardment on our sensory organs, all the things that need to come in through the eye, all the things that our ear could pick up, all the sounds near and far, all the sensations as we wear our clothes, as we sit in our chair, as we have a dog perhaps that's sitting on our lap. And if our brain had to pick up on all of this, we know what happens. We get what many people term as sensory overload, and that's not a very good safe space to be in. In actual fact, I've done a lot of research lately on this, and in terms of our neurofeedback work that we're doing, we see that this constant sensory overload actually creates trauma in the body, and we see a trauma brain pattern for children who battle with sensory overload. So that's a different story, but let's take a look at what happens. And so we have to filter all this information coming in, and as much as us academic people wish that we are a computer and that you could type in a verbal instruction and that the brain and the mind and the body would all be online with this and accepting of your command and take on what you're saying at language value, this is not how our bodies work. In actual fact, the part of ourselves that our subconscious, which is really running the show, is working on patterns that have been formed. And these patterns have been formed according to emotions that we've experienced. And so if we were a computer system, we wouldn't be physically typing in a language, a sentence into the body to take heed of. We would be typing in, I guess, if I could take us a little bit on a journey here, we would be typing in the computer coding of a certain emotion if we could. And so this whole filtering system is run around our emotions, our feelings, and what it is in terms of that space that we value and then prioritize. And so our values are what inspires us. And you will know this if you have a teenage son. Again, coming directly from what Dr. John Martini expressed, but you do not have to motivate any, I'm generalizing here, any young boy to play TV games. He will, by himself, have all the enthusiasm and motivation, I'm guessing, of the universe on his side to sit for hours at end in front of a computer screen, learning how to work the controls, learning the rules of the game, learning how you can buy and upskill and upgrade. Vast amounts of information, as I say, required to play these games, and yet these children know it, and it seems so effortless to them. Why? It's because it's something that they value. On some level, it has satisfied a need, and they have really been now intrinsically driven to learn all this information that, I must be honest, I find that I've got no time to do. It offers very little meaning and value to me as a mother at this point in my life. Okay, and so the things that we don't value, we are not going to have the same motivation and enthusiasm to do. And so now we need external forces to help us almost to achieve these. We need this punishment or reward system so that we are either, scared of not doing it, or we feel like there's a sense of reward when we do. And so all this information is coming in, and as much as I've put it by the heart, because I want to remind you that it's all to do with the emotion and the feeling and the value and the priorities, this thalamus actually is a part of our brain. And so as I just read the words here a little bit more, we see that yes, this is coming in through the thalamus, which is the gatekeeper, the filter. And this filter is filtering the information from the spine and the information coming in from the brainstem, going to this relay center called the thalamus, which will then filter what is important and what isn't according to our priorities. And so we filter our whole reality according to what is important to us, what we can relate to, reality, what we can relate to. And so a mom walks into a shop, again, Dr. De Martini's example, but a mother will walk into a shop, and what will her reality be filtered by? Well, it will be filtered by the fact that she values being a mom, perhaps. And again, maybe that isn't your reality. Maybe you've got something else that you value more. And according to where this falls in your little value system, which value you prioritize most, you will notice that that will be the one that's easiest for you. And so the mom walks into the shopping center and she's going to see clothes for kids. She's going to see kids' toys. She might see educational games. She might see food that the kids might enjoy. But her reality is going to be filtered according to that. Her husband, who's a businessman, well, he's going to walk in and he might be looking at the brands, the logos, the shop fronts, which shops are more busy, which shops are advertising very well. He might be looking at suits, computer and technology, if that has to do something with his kind of business and his set of values. And so we're going to look at behavior in and out the classroom, so home and classroom, but in a system, the schooling system, we also need to ask, how do we create a sense or a value system there that the children coming into the classroom value and are excited and enthused by the work that they taught. And because the system is made for everybody, forcing every kid, no matter who they are, through the sausage machine, which I'll talk about just now, we also need to ask, how do we create the willpower for these children when they do not value the subject or the subject matter to push through? So if we do not value this stuff and we're not naturally excited by it, if we're a little bit even worried by it, it's not necessarily going to go through the thalamus in the same way as we're speaking here, but it's going to be directed to the amygdala. And these are parts of the brain that then pushes us into this place where we want to seek pleasure, and avoid pain. Now, ironically, when we really value something, we find the strength to cope with both. And so we do. We want to consider the schooling system sadly also values a very particular type of learner. Many schooling systems, ethos, attitudes, firstly, really push for academics. And not every child is an academic child or has the skills for fact learning and recalling. Some children are very good with their bodies, with doing things, with building stuff, with creating things. And of course, sadly, as much as we are very far down this path in education, and we've got all these years of experience that we could draw on to create really powerful curriculum and options for all learners, we are not there yet. Further than this, we have these schools that only praise excellence. And I say this thinking of one particular school that every year has to have a quote. And I eventually chuckled when I thought, you know, what next where, you know, good isn't good enough type thing. But excellence is only accepted type thing. You know, that kind of quote. Because this is where you see many schools going towards. What are they rewarding when we get through to this point where we say, you know, if this needs to be an external force of reward and punishment, which is often discussed at school level, what are we rewarding? Well, we only reward the top achiever. We only reward the best sportsman. We only reward children who get 80% and above. We only reward the person who came first in the subject, as I say, not the person who even came second, be it by a 0.005 of 8%. And we've got to be very careful as we also bring to this place our value systems. So my big question as we start to consider how we actually learn, how we found our motivation, is this: how can we change it? Before we carry on, how do we actually do this? And I think the sad thing is that so often kids in general do not understand how school or how being a certain way at home honors what is highest for their value system. And so when we start really working with children and where they're at and what they potentially have come to this earth to achieve, their purpose, when we see them as being unique, when we see them as needing to mature and blossom into a forest of different plants that will serve this world in many different ways, then we can start honoring their value system and showing them how schooling, how behaving a certain way, how connecting with people in a certain way, all align with this. And this is when we can, if we can really give the child the why are we at school for 12 years of our life? 27 hours a day, it feels like at the moment. Why are we doing this? When this has meaning and purpose, they will find the motivation to push through. But we are the mentors as the adults in their life. We are the ones that need them to understand how and why schooling is going to be part of this becoming and not a form of punishment for the next 12 years where they are just being forced to do something that may not be honoring them as the individual they're becoming. We'll begin by now just chatting about the elephant in the room, and that is stress. Stress, stress, stress. And everybody thinks stress is a bad thing, hey? Well, the word stress, if you really want to get to the origins of it, actually refers to the forces, the invisible forces acting on an object. And so the real term stress comes from like a construction field where you can imagine a little beam as part of a roof truss. And in order for that beam to stand there and fulfill its purpose in life as a supportive beam, it needs to be resilient. as these forces are acting on it. And when these forces are acting on it, it will seem like it's standing still. But let's pretend this little beam is a wooden beam, and of course it is aging, it is getting worn out, it's getting to be a tired little beam perhaps. It's had all these, the roof tiles have blown off, and it's had the sun beating down on it. It's been exposed to all these very harsh environments over time, and it's worn down in its integrity. So this beam in this truss could break, could give way, could collapse. And so it wasn't the stress, all these forces pulling on it for the many years, that had been the issue, but rather the fact that it got itself to a point where it was no longer able to withstand in the face of all of these invisible forces acting on it. And so stress is the same thing, and stress is actually a very important aspect of life. Without stress, we would not be here. It was stressful to be born. Some people say that's the most traumatic event in most people's lives. Thank goodness we don't remember it. It was the stress of pushing oneself through a birth canal, and all the complications that possibly took place before and during and then after. It was the stress of learning to walk. It was the stress of learning to talk. And had we never had these stresses, we wouldn't have a need to grow. And so it's in the face of these stresses that perhaps we should rather see as challenges, that we begin to create a strength within ourselves, a resilience. And so this little picture that I'm sure you're wondering about, why have I got it on the screen here? This is what we term in Educate as our learning flow. And it's a lovely diagram. And if you are new to Educate and all these kind of things, you think, oh, that's nice. But I've come to realize through the years of really walking the walk and walking this path on trying to really assist people, that this is actually very, very powerful. And this little lazy 8 or infinity sign that we here see that loops continuously, and you can see where you'd start here, so from left to right and then back again. Well, this isn't a flat infinity or lazy 8. This in actual fact is one that is moving up as we circle back and forth. It's one that we're building onto. And so we begin always the journey with where we feel comfortable, where we feel safe, or where we have resources, and that is our green side, the got it side. We understand things, we're able to recall things and remember. It's part of our experience, it's a part of our resource pack, both internally in terms of our own skills and characteristics and gifts and talents, as well as the resources I find in my environment, be that the parent I could ask for help, or the sibling, or the friend at school, or the textbook, or the fact that I have access to Google and I can Google things. I have got resources, and when I have enough resources, I then am ready to take on that challenge, the getting it part. I can shift over into that orange space where I'm about to learn something new. There, because it's something new, I might be going slowly. I might be taking things into account, breaking things apart, looking at how it's made up, stopping to really consider and research some things, going carefully because it's something new. And of course, as I entertain and explore and participate and become curious about this new information, so it becomes part of who I am, part of my experience. And in doing that, it packs itself back onto the green side. It becomes something I can draw on. And while we have got this imbalance, we are on track. And you can see the little picture of this little car driving beautifully on track. And of course, we're able to, as I say, really pull from our environment and of course support ourselves so that we have access to whatever it is that we need to cope. The big problem is when this goes awry, when this is not in balance. And we see in terms of behavior, our children then responding according to each side. And so the children who are too scared to face the challenge, to move into the orange, while they tend to circle the green over and over again, they tend to want to perhaps avoid this, and so they're pulling back. And when we pull back and we don't have a challenge, well, life becomes boring. We find distractions. We battle with procrastination. We feel stuck and we feel depressed because there's nothing new, there's nothing exciting, there's no dopamine release in achieving what we have set our hearts to do. On the other hand, if we get stuck in this space where we've got all this stress, all this challenge, let me say, but not enough resources to pull on, well, then I'm going to battle with anxiety, for instance. I'm going to be working very, very hard, thinking that if I just keep putting the effort in, it's going to be better. I become a perfectionist. I become intolerant of my mistakes. I become frustrated. I have racing thoughts. And again, as we consider how each of these children might physically be showing these signs, we as parents and teachers can notice which side of this learning flow are children getting stuck in. This is so important because children or people often need an outsider to catch them when they're getting stuck. Often when we're getting stuck, we do not have, and these also link to the details, the information, and the perspective. And so the details again falls on our orange side with regards to this beautiful learning flow, and the bigger picture, the perspective being on the green. We need that balance to be able to step into the details, but at the same time to be able to step back and see how it fits together, and if this is actually, the path that we want to be on. And so, as I say, we can watch for the children who are avoiding, procrastinating, being bored, getting stuck, seeming distracted, and we can understand that these children perhaps need a bit more challenge in their life. They need to set some goals. They need to really look at the facts. Or we can notice our little perfectionistic, people-pleasing type, excelling children who are rewarded for people-pleasing and excelling, and they're just good at it. And we can notice the level of anxiety, the fact that they're irritable, the fact that they're frustrated, the fact that they're agitated, the fact that they seem full of energy and not knowing where to put it. And so again, by noticing the behaviors that belong to each side of this learning flow, we as adults and parents can start understanding that neither one of these children, whether they're procrastinating or they are people-pleasing lunatic, they both are actually not living in balance. And these behaviors, although one is far more acceptable than the other, they are not healthy. They cause disharmony, distress, and disease in the body, dis-ease. And so I finished this little slide off by saying I worked with a lady, and she's done very well. She's now a lady. At the time she was a student. And it's quite a sad story because when she came to see me, she was completely neurotic. You could see had breakouts on her skin, was completely overwhelmed. And her goal, her drive in life was to be number one in the grade. And of course, she spoke at length about the fact that the number two was hot on her heels, and that she would spend her entire day, life, evening, weekends studying just to be able to achieve this goal. And while that is all fair and good, and it's important to have goals as well, I couldn't help but notice how much the family actually really pushed for her to achieve, how much praise she was given, how posts were posted on social media when she achieved these goals. And it was quite sad because after I worked with her, when she went home, she didn't want to actually work as hard. She saw value in taking the break. But sadly, that's not what her parents saw. And they became very frustrated at the fact that this child was not studying like she had been over and over and over and over. And so she didn't actually come back for another session, sadly, because that was exactly what her parents wanted. They wanted her to continue pushing, to continue doing these people-pleasing and these things that get social acclaim. But they just wanted somehow me to create a child who is more resilient, to face and upstand or stand within these absolutely unrealistic expectations. And we find many of our children who achieve incredibly well at school, while they leave matric, and many of them battle with anxiety and depression, because what they have learned to do is to really play the game that results in acceptance, praise, and reward. And when you leave school, there is no longer the system that rewards something so specific as academic excellence. And furthermore, there is nobody telling you what you should do so that you can just go ahead and do it and get praised for this. No, then you need to figure this out in a world that doesn't play that game, in a world where you can be anything. And excellence is not key. No, figuring it out, survival, becoming who you are is what's actually so important. And so these academic kids are among a huge group that leave matric and battle with depression. So these are some of the things taught in our Educate courses, which I have many if you're interested. But this one I really want to just go back and explain now. So every child is born with unconditional love and acceptance. I believe that's something that is inherently ours and divinely ours, except we are born into an imperfect world that has conditions for love and is very quick to reject and abandon. And so we see this absolute need of our children, first of all, for physical safety. And as I spoke about before, this physical safety also is embedded in feeling safe and secure in relationship. Because I'm a helpless little baby, I rely on my mom and dad to feed me, and they feed me because they love me. So they won't forget me because, of course, yes, I have this connection. I am meaningful to them. And so you can absolutely see, and of course I want to get right back into this, it is so vital for the brain and the child to connect with the parent at a young age, to establish a bond, to establish a sense of safety. And many children, as we see on the autistic spectrum, cannot relate and connect with people, very closely actually linked with our mouth reflexes. And that, quite interestingly, is affected often by our skull that hasn't been manipulated through the birth canal, through C-section, if that's the case. So there's a lot of other little things that go on here. But of course, I need to bond, I need to connect. And if I can connect with my primary caregivers and I understand my sense of value and worth, and I'm physically looked after, well, then I actually experience loving and belonging, and I can develop a sense of self in relation to. Relation being the key word here. We're seeing plenty of kids with this RAD type behavior. And what makes it worse is that children learn through the non-verbal cues of mom and dad. As mom pulls funny faces, we all become that crazy person with squeaky voices and over-emphasized wrinkled faces. I'm thinking about the wrinkles, expressions that lead to wrinkles later on. And we act quite silly. This is called mother's ease, because this is the voice, the sounds that the kids respond to at that age. And their mirror neurons are firing as mom smiles and they see this give and take of relationship and the sense of worth through the feedback they're getting from mom. So really, really important time. And as I think about that, I think of how many moms do not do that. Nowadays, we can be distracted by our cell phones, by social media, by something else when we feel like feeding our child, which is so important for nurturing. This is where breastfeeding comes in, as I talk about that mouth reflex. When we breastfeed our child, that child is close to our heart. They can actually feel our heart and our warmth. They feel mom being close, and at the same time, mom is their source of nourishment, their source of their provider. And so now food time is difficult and mom is tired and she's made the mash. Hopefully she didn't go buy something full of all rubbish. And now instead of looking and doing aeroplane and really watching the kid, our face is turned away. Our face is in a stream. We are unavailable. We are not giving our children face time to connect. And this is something that I believe is happening more and more. And then, of course, we shout at our children where they don't understand the relationships and how it is to be sociable. And so I just wanted to show you with this little Maslow's law of hierarchy how safety is key. And when children do not feel safe, as I've said so throughout this whole little presentation, they will become reactive, fight, flight, or freeze. And so we as parents, we as teachers first need to ask that, how do I create a safe space during this time where this child is asking, am I safe? Where am I in space, as they start to understand themselves as a body? And again, this has got far more meaning. And of course, you can see we look at different parts of the brain as we then connect them to Maslow's law of hierarchy. Again, I will take you through this in a course one day, hopefully, but absolutely starts off with focus. Focus being what? Attention. To attend, to be present, to be in the here, to be in the now, to be able to be fully aware, to be able to participate, to be able to move within that space, whether it be forwards, backwards, sideways, as we go towards step away from or step out of the way from something, to fully comprehend, to take in first. You can see expressing or communication comes right at the end, once I'm a little body who's been able to make sense of everything else that's taken place first. As I said earlier, every single child is born with the hope that they will be loved and accepted unconditionally. But unfortunately, yes, we learn very, very quickly via the interactions that we have with our parents and the world around us that this is not a world that understands unconditional love. And so children begin to make sense of who they are. And we see this in terms of our different types of personalities. And so while this little graph might look a little bit crazy or scary to some, it's really just all these lines help one understand our personality type. And then, of course, one line is moving towards a different one, while a second line coming out of yours would be moving towards yet another picture. And that just goes to show that we also then take on different types of personalities when we are happy and coping versus when we are stressed and feeling overwhelmed. And so don't get caught up by all these strange and crazy lines. There is nothing sinister to it other than it being a diagram or a map for you to map out your own personality type and then discover which one you're going to, or which other personality traits you're going to see more of or less of, depending on your ability to cope. And so these are the basic messages a person might get. And if you were to do a profiling session, we would look at this if you were looking particularly to discover your child's behavior and why it is that they respond that way. And so we would map their personality type and give you a lot of information regarding what triggers them, what they are moving towards in general as that person or that type, and what are they trying their best to avoid. We will give you classroom strategies, we'll give you strategies to use in the house, and they would really be able to be more streamlined according to your family's needs. We have some lovely profiles, as I say, where we actually even map the whole family, and then we've brought this together to understand the family dynamic. As a teacher, understanding each of these, you don't necessarily need to map each of the children in your class's personality, although sometimes it is quite helpful to know this child is behaving like this, and these are the things that will work better with them. If you understand all 9 of these as a teacher, as I say, you would know how to work around them, knowing that at the core of each personality is this needing to be loved, and if I can't be loved, I will go for attention. So you must remember that. These little children who are behaving poorly, who are throwing tantrums, who are creating a scene, it is because they feel the opposite. And this is something so important as we look at behavior. We will always react out of a need, and we never need to discipline the behavior. We need to understand the need behind the behavior and rather give the child an appropriate way to ask for assistance there, because that behavior is coming from a space where maybe they need a little bit of TLC. Maybe they're feeling unloved, maybe they're feeling tired, maybe they're feeling ratty, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're feeling unseen, unheard, and as though they don't matter. And our response to that behavior is going to allow them to feel either that they are important to us and that they do matter, or if we choose to shout at them because of the behavior, what we will have rather is taking away their communication means to tell us that they are struggling, and then we never get to the root cause behind the behavior. And so we see many teenagers who feel isolated, alone, and we don't know why. But their entire life, every time they have called for help in the inappropriate means and ways that they know how to, they have been reprimanded and been rejected because of that. And so we need to remind them that there are better ways when they are feeling this way to ask for assistance. And so if we get back to basics and we understand that, and if we understand that the unloved child will call for attention, and if they can't get positive attention, they will go for negative attention. And so if this little kid is in the school of excellence and they are not excellent in the ways and means that the school values, and they start realizing this, first of all, they're going to have a very bad self-concept on their own gifts and talents, so they'll have a very poor self-esteem. And then what they will realize very quickly is that they're not good enough to get your attention, your positive attention, but they can get your negative attention, and they will go for that over no attention, because no attention means they are invisible, they do not exist, and they do not matter. And so yes, this is quite a big story here, but these are the ways that these little kids and people in the world understand that they can find their place and get acceptance, get attention, because as I say, it is so difficult to really feel loved in this world, it would seem. And so number one is not at the top, is in actual fact the grey one. The color for him is actually silver, and this little person has discovered that they must be perfect. If they are perfect, they get praise, they are right, they are good, and so they must be perfect all the time, because that's the key to love. Number two is the little one, and we're going in a clockwise way here. He's the red guy, and he says, I must be helpful. And so this little person is there carrying the teacher's monkey and doing all the errands, and they get a real big kick out of the fact that they are needed. Number three, Shane, this is the only one that these schools of excellence cater for, but these schools of excellence push competition, jealousy, selfishness, all the things we don't want to see. But number three will do very well there, because he just wants to be the best, and he will lie, fib, cheat, and disguise and distract from any imperfection in his life, so that he can come across as the best, the most wonderful, and on top of. Number four is our arty child, and this child believes they need to be different, they need to be special, they need to stand out. Number five is the smart child, who needs to know everything, the big know-it-all, and they tend to really withdraw from society when they're not doing well. Number six, Shame, he's just going to do whatever you want as a teacher, just to stay under the radar, to be loyal, to do his duty, with much anxiety and fear, because he can't control the uncontrollable, and so he cannot create a safe space where little Peter sits next to him and little Peter agitates the teacher, and then the teacher screams at everybody and gives everybody break detention because Peter threw a piece of paper and he didn't want to come forward about it, for instance. So little six, poor little kid who is just trying to be good and safe and secure the whole time in a very insecure, unsafe place. Number seven, Shane, these guys get told they're ADHD all the time. They just want fun, and they're avoiding anything painful. Boredom is seen as painful, so they can never just relax, because if they relax they might get bored, and that they don't want. So they have to plan continuously the next thrill, the next thrill, the next thrill. So these children are never present, but always looking to the next best thing. Number 8 in your class, well, you know what, and I've seen this happen again and again, and I'm busy actually dealing with a situation like this. In a little world where the teacher wants to be I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it, the ruler, the god of their classroom, to have full control, and everybody needs to just adhere to their rules. Well, the number 8 is going to be a huge problem, because he wants to be in control, and he's very good at spotting when you as a teacher are being unfair, and he's most definitely not going to let you know when he's feeling vulnerable. In actual fact, if you put him on the spot and you make him feel insecure and unsafe, and you reprimand him and you shout unnecessarily, and you found to be wanting, he will push back, and he will just keep pushing back more and more and more. The more stress and anxiety you put on this little one, he will not stop, and you might have won the battle, but he's planning on winning the war. And so you've got to be very careful that you don't get into power struggles with this personality type, because it is a very real and acceptable personality type. It is one of the 9, and we cannot, through our behavior, teach this little 8 that who he is not good enough. We have to again mentor and guide him as the adults and mentors in his life. And our number 9, we love our number 9 because he just doesn't want to stand out. He just wants to get on with it. He wants to keep the peace. He wants to get harmony. But again, very, very sad for this little one in a life filled with unpleasant things that tend to happen. And so all these little learners, we have to give them the skills. All these little people, no matter where they're sitting on this graph, as I say, all created by our Creator and appropriate personality types. Each of them need different guidance. And depending on their little trigger, because each of them have a very specific trigger, so depending on their trigger, we're going to see different behaviors. Again, we have a full course on this called Unpacking Behavior. So if you really do want to learn more about these and have access to what these personality types are, and as I say, all the wealth of information I've been able to gather from the research and courses that I've done on this, that you could then have it at your fingertips as a teacher. As I say, I highly recommend looking into perhaps that course. So as we continue to look at stress and how it relates to how well we can perform, and how well we behave, and all these things, I want to just share this with you. Again, something that we will do in our profiling session. Again, a course that is available to teachers and parents. But we use ways and methods and techniques to map out the brain's organization when stressed. And so when we're calm, we can think from a holistic point of view. We can really shift between left and right brain and what it is that they do. When we are stressed, we tend to either become more emotional, which links a little bit more with our right brain in terms of this, or more harsh and logical, which links with the left. And so, yes, these things have been made simple or simpler so that the lay person can use these kind of tools in the classroom or in the household. Our brain, although looking at this, we need to understand our brain is fantastic. It is an adaptive, complex organ, which again is another room for another chat. But this is where neurodiversity for me is not a thing, because every brain is diverse. And rather, neurodiversity doesn't refer to a brain that thinks differently from others, but rather an individual who hasn't learned or been able to learn the social norms to fit into the behaviors of what is socially acceptable, and that kind of way. They haven't followed suit on what we've been putting out there for people to catch our drifts, basically. And so again, another talk for another day. But of course, this is definitely something that we can look into, and it really goes to show a person's abilities to cope in a situation. Just a quick one here as we look at this little profile that I've got here on the left, that, as I say, is part of our process. But if you consider our right side of our body talks to the left side of our brain, and the left side of our body talks to the right side of our brain, well, if I'm choosing to use my right side of the body, as in this picture, but then I'm using the right side of my brain, again, very simplified version of what's happening actually. It means that my body and brain are not in communication. And so as each of these sensory organs link to something literal, and then something a little bit more figurative in our understanding and mapping of our body and what it means on a very deep level, so we are then limited in certain ways. So this poor person cannot see, cannot communicate, the hand represents communication, cannot hear and cannot do, and so is going to be very, very trapped and stuck in the classroom. This little person, if I put him on the spot, wouldn't be able to do much at all. And the minute that they are calm and moving again, they will have access to their whole brain and all their sensory organs again. And of course, they're the ones that leave the exam room and go, oh, I knew that answer. But in that moment with that stress, with them shutting down, with them gating off, they didn't have access in order to be able to recall it, to even read the questions, and then to respond in writing or even in speaking. And then on the right here, I just wanted to share this with you. So this is a little one I know personally. And you can see top here, same learner, different teacher. In the first class, this learner feels overwhelmed and rushed. And in the second, she feels appreciated and supported. And never mind having to read what she's written, you can see this in her handwriting. So just imagine if her handwriting, if you follow people who are graphologists and what writing means and how writing is able to capture the state of our mind and sense of being in that moment, you could really understand how limited and how stressed this little child is, and that her thinking is going to follow suit in that first lesson where she cannot even write neatly, where the writing is completely pulling backwards in this avoidance type of a slant. And of course that very untidy underlining. Sure, so we're not even looking at spelling and answering of questions there, although it does look like she got 2 ticks, so good on her for coping in a very stressful situation. So what happens if a child doesn't wake up every morning and think, yo, how can I upset my teacher, my mom, my dad? How can I get myself into the biggest trouble and get myself rejected as fast as I can? I think it's quite a surprise to some, because some people, when you talk to them and they say they just need a warm hiding, a warm klap, and maybe some people do. I won't say there's no room for that. We read in the Bible, spare the rod and spoil the child. And so, yes, there's definitely discussions about boundaries and how to discipline the child who isn't able to understand communication yet, but you need to keep safe. That's a discussion for another day. But beyond that, we need to start understanding not every child is actually waking up trying to upset you. They don't start off their day like that. And I'm going to say this, and people don't like this word, but we lose them bit by bit along the way when we fail to help and see and support the child behind the behavior. So I'm saying that again because it is so important. But what happens if some of the behaviors that we're seeing is coming from inside the body? How nice. Let's just start and ask our mommies now. Mommies, we here have a cycle that we always in somewhere along the line, either up or down or in or out. And we know when we are feeling really bad, we probably behave badly. We throw adult tantrums, we fight with people, we shout, we are rude on the road, we carry on like hooligans, but we don't call it what it is. We don't call it an adult tantrum. We just expect people to either stay back or give us support, or and we give ourselves actually far more grace than we give our children. And so children who are sickly, children who have inflammation in the body, children who have heavy metals in the body, children who have poor gut health, which is a huge deal. Maybe their behavior is coming from their gut. Your gut creates 97% of the serotonin, and this serotonin goes on and does so much in the brain and body. In the gut, we also see dopamine, which is our reward neurotransmitter being made. Glutamate, very important for the brain. GABA, which helps us calm and relax and ease off that anxiety. And acetylcholine. Now, if you have a picky eater, your child was C-section born, they didn't get all the gut health that they needed to, they've been eating gluten for so long, they have a leaky gut, they have insensitivities, insensitivities is the behavior, hey? But they have sensitivities and intolerances, and the immune system, which 70% of the immune system is around the gut, so because of all of this, the immune system is shot. They are stressed all the time, so there's adrenaline pumping up all the time. They've been on a cortisone injection or pump or a steroid type medication. They've had antibiotics that strip their gut bacteria. These are all things in the gut that are going to very much affect the child. Never mind, and this is something I heard a new thing today, what happens about the sleep patterns? Are they sleeping? This apparently is backed by scientific research, which I will definitely be looking into, but I'm going to put it out there in the meantime until I can tell you where to go up and read it. But they say about 50% of the kids apparently who, and this comes from a health coach I was chatting to this morning, about 50% of the children diagnosed with ADHD are actually sleep deprived. This makes sense if you understand reflexes and you understand how the fear paralysis has to do with the formation of sleep patterns. But apparently, over and above this, you also get the rhythms, these sleep patterns, these rhythms within that change up as children go into their teens. And this is a very important time because it's during this time that the brain's continuing to develop. Their decision-making part of the brain, the front left lobe, only really fully developing within their 20s, so we understand. And so they're all emotion, you know, teenager, all emotion, not always as much logic. But this type of development that's happening in the brain is occurring while they are in REM cycle. And yet, while their sleeping patterns have shifted, we as a society haven't shifted our expectations on them. And so their sleep time remains the same. And yet this rhythm within the body is off. And so these are one of them, or some of the many different things that physically can be happening. Along with that, we've got reflexes, these automatic moves that are triggered, causing much anxiety and stress in the nervous system. And not only that, we've got children that store, or we as people store our emotional stress within the body, within the fascias. So that's a thin little like lining in between the meat and the skin. So when you're having your steak next time and you get that weird spider web type membrane you have to pull off and you never know what part of the animal that was, well, that is the fascia, and it's been found that it's within that space that we've got some of this energy, this anxious energy sitting that needs to be removed or moved with physical movement and with stuff that actually calm down the body. And so much help and support can come from ensuring that you're taking omega-3s to calm inflammation in the body, using something like chlorophyll found in barley leaf, to take and bind to heavy metals and toxins and pull them out the body, ensuring that your child is sleeping, ensuring that your child is getting enough sleep, the right kind of sleep at the right time. And then, of course, really doing things to eliminate things that cause leaky gut syndrome, and to, like your lactose that causes inflammation in the body. And again, while I've done a lot of research on all of this and sell AIMS products, I'm not qualified beyond this information that I share with you for educational purposes to really direct you. And I would really advise people to start seeking first this kind of stuff when we have these children who have got these huge, big behaviors and don't seem to be able to self-regulate because this nervous system is just so overwhelmed. And of course, this is also going to look at, how does this affect the brain? So much of the stuff that we eat and we're in contact with, this crosses the blood-brain barrier. And we see many of these children battling with concentration issues and behavioral issues, actually having inflammation, and they've even found some yeast in the gut. In terms of autism spectrum disorder, Dr. Josh Madsen, and I really highly recommend that you follow him, also talks about the fact that there's this mitochondrial dysfunction that they found in a lot of kids with these issues. Mitochondria gives the brain energy, and you need energy for brain cells to connect and to create connections, which is actually what learning looks like, looking like these little neurons forming new little connections. Quite a fascinating thing to watch. And of course, as we use these new connections, they strengthen, and these are able then to be used more efficiently and quicker so that we can arrive at answers and solutions faster. And so if we don't have the energy in the body because our viruses or toxins or poor gut health has caused very low energy in terms of this mitochondria being able to deliver to the brain, then we're going to have problems. And behavior is a mental problem as well. That's why I guess we talk about mental health. And of course, all this stuff happens within a being who's got a view on life. But of course, the more resilient we are, the more capable we are of actually dealing with our things and understanding that we ourselves are strong enough to move through stresses and really come out on top. So that was looking from the body, all these things that can happen in the body, and we've touched personality and mindset and how it is that we operate, and we don't want to disregard, the fact that so much of our childhood trauma happens before an age even where the left brain, which really records events and details, has come online. And so sometimes in our life we are left with this emotional trauma, but no way to really process it cognitively because it didn't take place when our brain was able to really understand and logic out and even record these events that took place. And again, if you want to get into that, Dr. Gabor Mate is fantastic at talking about traumas and childhood traumas, and the fact that traumas are really the wound and not the event, which is really, really good to understand and remember, because we can't go back in time and erase something that happened to us, but we can heal and make meaning from things that have, and then it could actually even propel us, steer us forward, give us motivation to be the change in our life. And so yes, you guys don't have the privilege of mapping your child's brain, of lifting up the bonnet and seeing what's taking place, but as a neurofeedback practitioner, I do. And so I just wanted to share just one little screen of some of the information we're able to collect when we do a neurofeedback assessment. So sounds fancy, sounds scary, sounds terrifying, but what happens when you come for a neurofeedback assessment is I will put little electrodes on your head that's linked to an amp and to my software that's going to be recording the energy, the electricity of a person's brain on these different positions that I've placed on the head. So there's no electricity in the actual electrode, and I think people seeing wires of the EEG is sometimes very scary. They think of terrible things like shock therapy and scientific experiments and Frankenstein. That's definitely not the case. This is an invasive, drug-free opportunity that is not as expensive as an MRI or CAT scan or even a SPECT scan. It's a way and a means to have a look and have an understanding at how the brain is utilizing the energy coming up. And in understanding that and how this brain controls behavior, we can quite quickly start understanding if a person is going to have perhaps big responses to stress, getting stuck on stuff. And so this little brainwave one that I've brought up, this little map, is quite interesting because if you go down the left-hand side, you see a red hot fire in the middle of this kid's head. And that is already, as I look at this, going to be something that shouts at me, because this middle part here of the brain is all about stubbornness, oppositional defiance, automatically saying no, getting stuck on something. And I'm actually working with a little kid who we haven't assessed, but I can suspect, as I say, probably something similar going on in his little brain. And so he's getting in trouble all the time because he is not listening. And when we say not listening, he's not following instructions. And when we say he's not following instructions, he's being stubborn, inflexible, and refusing to put down the task at hand to move over to the next one when need be. And of course, this is all agitated. This particular pattern in this particular frequency is also linked to anxiety. And because it is so red hot, I can imagine anxiety through the roof. We can also see on some of the little pictures here a lot of activity. If I'm looking for the greens and the reds and the yellows and that kind of color in each frame, we can see as I get to 23 to 38, there's a green blob on the side, the right side of the head. And I know it's the right because the little triangle's the nose, and then the two half circles are the ears. And this side here, when we see a lot of extra activity going on in this side, especially with that frequency is talking about hypervigilance. So we don't want this fast of a brainwave. We want fast brainwaves when we need to concentrate. And as I look over this, I can imagine this person must battle it in the classroom, because that kind of brainwave that we need to concentrate is about 19 to 23 hertz. So if I go to my right, it would be the second column down. You've got the three blues next to each other. And you can see there's blue, only blue, slight turquoise coming up on that right side there. And that means that this brain doesn't have enough energy to actually concentrate, to do things that require language, because that's actually the language brainwave. And as I say, instead of having this fast brainwave for concentration that we need at that 19 to 23 range, if we go one down, we've got absolutely hypervigilance on the side of the brain that represents a big emotional response. All emotion, no logic. And so again, this person is going to be incredibly emotionally responsive, especially I can imagine when stressed. If I go back to the first side and we see all the beautiful, lovely greens, but if I look at the numbers where they're sitting, they are 4 to 6 and 6 to 8 hertz. And so that being column 1 and row 1 and row 2 on my left-hand side. And this just goes to show a person who has got a slower brain, who is probably more creative, but very much in their daydream type state, really going to battle with focus in the class. And so why am I telling you all of this? Well, first, maybe to impress you with all the information we can get from neurofeedback, and to tell you that we can, in subsequent sessions, let this client come back in, put the electrodes on these places that I'm talking about to work, and then the brain will be offered a reward every time it does what we want it to do in that space, and an inhibit. And so it's not shock therapy, please. So as the person sits there and the brain does what we don't want it to do and falls back into its old paths, old habits, we will see that the screen dims that they're watching, or the earphones that they have on their ears, the music in the earphones are going to jump, will not flow nicely. And then every time the brain does what we would prefer it to do there, the screen will brighten, the music will play, and the brain sees this as a reward. And because we are driven by reward, as I say, if you know, as we go back to those first ones where we need punishment, the inhibit or the reward, the brain absolutely tries to do it more and more. And with this consistency of training the brain, it will start developing new neural pathways to really reach the demand and strengthen, and in so doing the old ones will be done away with, and this person is going to be able to self-regulate more, shift more, concentrate better, because we will train the brain to use its own energy more efficiently. So we've taken a long time to understand how we need to be more compassionate, understand where this is coming from, that it might be in the body. But yes, we absolutely need rules, don't get me wrong here. And rules are there to keep us safe. So here's little Johnny, and without rules, he doesn't feel very grounded. He doesn't know where he's at. And this is one thing I really can take from neurofeedback. When we understand how the brain develops in terms of neurofeedback, offering the brain a reward or an inhibit, and making sure that this feedback in neurofeedback, the feedback is consistent and pure, the brain can start understanding what's expected of itself. And this is how behavior works as well. And so this creates a sense of security, of grounding, of having these boundaries, of knowing where I begin, where I finish. I have watched way too many a parent from an emotional point of view. And we see, as mom has had a good day, the child is their best friend and they are syrupy sweet. And, this child is lapped up in all the darlings and my sweetie pies and my googly bears. And you're so cute and you're so wonderful and you're so marvelous and you're just so funny, when they actually might be even doing something naughty. And then the next day when mom's had a bad day and the mom's throwing a tantrum, now the cute little funny little silly Billy of yesterday is now screamed at And so we see very inconsistent behavior from the environment, and that creates a very unpredictable, dangerous space for a child to be in. They don't know why yesterday what they did was fine, but today as I do it, it is like I'm being rejected, screamed at, called names, punished, and we're going to get to the word punishment soon. And so we absolutely need a parenting plan, because we have days when we are happy, we have days when we are angry, we have these emotions as I was talking about. And if we have a plan and we've turned it into rather a very logical step-by-step process, and we've thought about and considered steps we'd take when we're angry, well, that allows us to shift from that emotional space to that goal-driven space, the detail space, and then we are able to just follow through our plan without even getting offended or emotionally involved. So let's see some rules for creating rules. So we need to start early, as soon as the child knows right or wrong. And I was very blessed, because I had a child who really needed me to model and show, which we're going to get to, and really be consistent in my behavior and response. Maybe I'm a bit of a hooligan now that he's older, and I definitely need to take heed myself as I speak here this afternoon. But we absolutely, the minute they know right and wrong, it's not okay to put a child on a counter or put their feet on a counter where food is getting served. And if I show my child that I can stand and disrespect other people's belongings when they are small, well, why does it change when they are big and no longer cute anymore? Because cute children turn into nasty, ugly older children. And it's never really the parents that are seen as being poor parents, but it's rather the child who gets called a disrespectful person who basically hasn't been taught better. So the minute they know right or wrong, we need to start. And we start by setting an example, by modeling our behavior. I absolutely hate that line, do what I say and not what I do. Actions speak louder than words. Non-verbal communication comes before verbal communication, and if you can't set the example, then you can't expect your children to follow suit. Children are watching you, and many of the personality types that we spoke about earlier on, well, they don't care what you say, they care what you do. As I say, non-verbal communication is key in understanding if I can trust somebody or not. Set time aside for affection. And I forgot to say, all this information comes from a psychology book, The Young Child in Context by Marika de Wet. And this is actually part of our teaching degree. And I definitely use this textbook as a handbook. It's something that I go back to quite often every now and then and re-look at some of these things. So hopefully if you're a teacher, they're still using it. Set time aside for kids. Dr. Daniel Amen talks about at least 20 minutes a day. And when you're in that space, it's not judgmental. You're not going to be as strict as you usually are, because that time is about building a bond and connecting with them. And so, yes, you won't let children do dangerous things, but during those 20 minutes, that becomes downtime where you are connecting. Boundaries, set fixed limits. So please, when I do often these courses, people might be thinking, oh, but you're saying there's no, you know, just be nice, just be friendly, just be compassionate, just be understanding all of the time. No, everything is in balance, and boundaries allow a child to know where they are in space and what's expected of them. And when we are consistent with our boundaries and we stick to, if you do that, I'm going to be cross. If you do that, you're going to sit on the naughty chair no matter what. No matter if we got the promotion at work that day or won the lottery. A rule is a rule, and it's not an emotional thing. We need to create a safe, structured environment. So consider your environment. You know, I've heard of a school recently again where these children were made to split up, no longer be friends because they would do dangerous things on the playground. And I think that's quite sad, because boys and children need risk play, but a playground should never be so dangerous that I'm actually concerned for a child's safety, that I'd rather break up a friendship and split children, because of that. Risk play is incredibly important in so many skills, and I need to create an environment that's safe enough for children to be able to explore. And yes, do some things that might require a bit of risk. As a teacher, that means I'm going to be hyper vigilant, stressed out, traumatized probably when I do break duty. But this is why I also do my nut at schools where they see playground time as downtime for teachers as well. No, if you've got young kids, it's probably the most dangerous time during the day. And you absolutely can't have one teacher on a playground of hundreds of kids. You really need more support there. So we can't be fighting with kids all the time. And so we don't want to just be saying no all the time. And if we only say no, how do they know what is a yes? And so again, if you've done a play therapy course, I did a beautiful one where they used an ACT model, where they acknowledged what the child was going through, and then they communicated the behavior that they don't want to see, and then they said, but rather do. So guys, climbing that tree is quite dangerous. You could possibly fall. Rather come play here on the jungle gyms where I'm standing and there's a sand pit underneath. So, and then of course you don't necessarily even need to always have that discussion. You just change up what you're doing so that this child is not constantly hearing no. Oh, I laugh. I'm thinking about a joke and I'm going to botch it up if I try and reword it. But basically a child who thought his name was No or something along those lines. Because that was all he ever was called and all he was ever told. So control the situation, not the child. Yes, change up what's taking place. Again, I had a very, very blessed time growing up. It really changed my mind on disciplining children and raising kids. Sorry, I'm saying growing up, but with my kids growing up and having a child who isn't neurodiverse as much as you heard my comment on that. And didn't learn the way other kids learned. And so I absolutely had to continue to be like on the lookout. I don't think I sat for 4 years of my children's lives, and they were both so close. I can remember every party. I have very few friends. It's very sad because I suppose when all the moms were meeting and chilling and relaxing, that was not an option for me. I was standing at the jungle gym. I was intervening. I was for the safety of my son and for others, because he was at that stage not very verbal. And so I had to constantly be there in the front line, responding and reacting to every single little thing that he was doing to create a safe space, controlling that situation. We must also take heed here as we say that. How do I control the situation? Because when I lose control and I get stressed, what is the first thing I do? I start talking fast and I go very high-pitched, and you guess what? That stimulates a person. So I really need to get down to their level, look them in the eye, make sure I'm breathing and modeling breath, because breath is about being relaxed and present and able to be alive. When we're stressed, remember I spoke about we will hold our breath. Slow my voice. Make my voice even quieter, so they have to be quiet themselves to listen, and then look them in the eye and tell them what it is that I want. I am in control. And I think the sad thing is many of us parents aren't in control, and we feel like we aren't in control, and we act in a way that gives the signal to the child, Mom is not in control. Now's the time to throw the cat off the roof or kick your brother or do something crazy. So diversing here a bit, but hopefully for good cause. So involve the child in the choices. You want them to start considering for themselves what it is that they need to be doing and thinking, and really developing a sense of independence. Again, not just say do what I say and not what not what I do as you're told. But to have these little conversations and to grasp their understanding and to see where they're at and to allow them to also imagine and put themselves in somebody else's shoes as they make these choices. Would it be nice if this and this happened? Reward positive behavior. Praise the child. In our profile session, we look at the love language and we use that. As I'm talking, strengthen the child's self-esteem. Decide on what behaviors you do want. This is again probably a little exercise you and your husband would do. One night, sitting together, deciding on your values. You get back to those values and deciding what you want to see, and then what behaviors you really want to work at. And maybe you're going to tackle one behavior at a time. Because again, we can't say no, 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 because again, that gives our children a message that they are naughty, they are unacceptable. And as I hit on that, we never say to the child, you are naughty. Because if they're naughty, how will they be anything else if they are the embodiment of naughtiness and that's their sense of identity? But if I can say to a child, what you are doing is naughty, I know you can do better, show me, we give them the option to shift from that space. We give a firm warning, and again, a warning is a warning. If you keep overriding your warnings, they're going to see you don't have any boundaries and that you're not very strong and that you are a pushover and that they can manipulate you. You're going to ignore some behaviors, especially if they're not dangerous. And that's probably not just when you're ignoring them, but you're steering them towards something appropriate. Allow children within limits to actually experience negative consequences. It's okay not to be happy all the time. Happy is an emotion. It's not a state of being. I can be content. I can be satisfied. But I can't be happy all the time. You know, if somebody dies in my family, I'm going to be sad. But I can still experience a sense of safety and contentment around that sadness. Okay, discipline offences appropriately. So again, and this is where we've got to be very careful. Many schooling systems, they only ever, when they talk about a disciplinary policy, decide on how many ways and what's all the ways that they're going to abuse and punish. And I mean it with all the love in my heart. Hurt children mentally, emotionally, physically. And yes, we're not allowed to physically anymore, but I think people need to understand something. And again, this is with my years of research. Corporal punishment is not just physical punishment. It's actually, if you really had to read it up and do your own research, you would find that it involves the verbal bullying of children and really affecting their state of who they are. And so you're actually damaging their sense of self-worth. And we as people, parents and teachers, we have to be incredibly mindful of that, because words are powerful and words cause. That song, Sticks and Stones May Break My Words, but Words Will Never Harm Me, is the furthest from the truth, because long after the little bruise on your butt has healed from the little hiding that we're not allowed to give, that emotional trauma caused by calling a child a pathetic loser and you're never going to amount to anything, well, that's lifelong. Create a timeout and don't reward the child. Some teachers have a timeout where they kick them out of the class, and for the child who wants to avoid again, well, that's a perfect opportunity to avoid the lesson. Reassure your children and explain when they're calm. You know, when they're in the middle of the emotional breakdown, they're not listening to you. There is absolutely no point. That's when you tell them what happens now. You're going to sit on the naughty chair for 5 minutes, and when you are done, you can come out. And they can kick and scream and perform, and you're not moved or offended by that. You just restate that and put them back on. And we've all watched, hopefully, the Super Nanny set a beautiful example of how that can work. And once the child is calm, then we can say, I love you, I know you can do better. Can you explain to me what went wrong and why I had to put you on the naughty chair? And then you need to understand that this child does have an understanding of what went wrong. If they don't, that's a further problem. We can't punish children who do not understand what they're doing is wrong, and children who are not on board. And so when you put this plan together, a beautiful thing to do is actually to get them to sit with you and create it with you so that they are on board with what they're going to get punished for and what they can get rewarded for. And then you're going to individualize plans. So you don't need to punish the child to the nth degree if this is a very sensitive child, and you saying no is going to work well enough for that child to understand that they need to change their behavior. Otherwise, if you've got a child that needs a little bit of a different approach, you're absolutely going to do that. And we've been speaking a little bit about that. We've been talking about looking at gut health, looking at primitive reflexes. These again are things that are going to be very different to each child and be playing out very differently. And you're going to discuss the situation. Please, this should actually probably come way earlier on in this list. You know how often I have sat and I've chatted to kids. I teach Sunday school, and we always start the week off by what was your week like, what was good, what was bad. And how many times these children have found that adults are hypocrites and that they don't deserve the respect, because respect is earned and not given. And while children are young, they might not figure it out, but they get to an age where they're smart enough, they become teenagers, and they go back and they look back at their life and they color in all the spots they didn't have colors for before. And they have this emotional now toning and all this stuff that they now understand. And how often have I had a conversation and it wasn't actually the child's fault, or it was another child's fault, and the teacher in the heart of the moment and in the stress, or the parent and in the emotion of the moment, just lashed out and behaved poorly themselves and punished the wrong child, or punished where there wasn't even any foul play. And again, that is incredibly damaging for children. And not only that, very damaging for the relationship and the trust and respect that you have with the child that you're trying to work with. So we just want to now consider discipline versus punishment. And again, this comes from that lovely textbook, The Young Child in Context. And so discipline, the emphasis is on what the child should do, while punishment revolves around what the child shouldn't do. Discipline accepts the child's need to assert themselves, while punishment forces a child to conform. Discipline is all about modifying a child's behavior. However, punishment, we see this conditioning of the child and condemning the child. Discipline is positive, we set goals and is love-based, while punishment is negative and really centered around what the child is afraid of. Discipline sets examples to follow, while punishment insists on unconditional obedience. Discipline liberates a child, while punishment belittles and humiliates a child. Discipline is ongoing. It's an ongoing process that we understand that this isolated event is not isolated at all, but obviously falls within a child's life and understanding and where they're at in the journey. Whereas this punishment is all about what's happening in the moment and doesn't actually look forwards or backwards, projecting into the future where this might be going and what is good, a good lesson to take with one, and looking over, reflecting actually on the past and trying to understand why it is that this person is responding in the present like they are. Discipline helps the child to change. Punishment serves as a release rather for the adult. Discipline has faith that the child can think for themselves. Punishment thinks for the child. Discipline leads to self-control, while punishment undermines independence. Discipline promotes a positive self-concept, while punishment promotes a negative self-concept. Let's take a look at disciplinary styles, and there's going to be 4 that we look at. Again, same book. There's lots of research on this also on the internet if you want to really do your own homework. But we're going to be looking at 4 parenting styles. And yes, it's put forward as a parenting style, but please understand, as teachers, we are these little ones, substitute mom for the day. We are the adult in charge. And so we see, first of all, as we look at this graph, that there are 2 poles in this vertical aspect. We can look at a demanding side and an undemanding side. So, of course, demanding means I have expectations for children versus not having expectations as well. And then to the left and right, we can see these 2 extremes either being warm and accepting or cold and unaccepting. So let's start with this little bottom right-hand corner here, the neglectful disciplinary style. So people with this kind of style do not engage or are not present. They offer minimal support and direction, unconcerned about the child's emotional and behavioral requirements. We stay at the bottom here and we move over to still being undemanding, not expecting much, but warm now. And we're going to find out that this is also not the best. So we have this permissive type of disciplinary style, driven by the child, really gives or enforces rules in this case, and overindulgent to avoid conflict. So these parents are often scared of their little children. The child is in control, which actually is a very scary space for a child. A child doesn't want to be in control. They know they're not strong. They know they can't really stand up for themselves and fend for themselves. And so allowing the child to rule the roost, to call the shots, and to be afraid of your own child is really not the space to be in. We now see the authoritarian style, and this is parent-led, so cold and unaccepting but demanding, imposing rigid rules and consequences, engages in a one-sided communication, often overlooking the child's social and emotional needs. This is a lot of like that old traditional style, you know, children are seen and not heard. Respect your elders just because, do what I say, not what I do, because I said so. This kind of parenting style. And many of the older generation, you know, coming from these very harsh environments where, yes, many of them lived through a war and they really needed just to obey purely for safety's sake in that space, and everybody was in this absolute survival state. This may have served them to help them to survive, but of course it is not the best. So lastly, we have this democratic disciplinary style, which collaborates with the child to find a solution, establishes clear guidelines, defines expectations clearly, and encourages open dialogue and natural outcomes. And again, from that beautiful textbook, we see here, well, what does this mean? So if we have to look at the democratic style, childhood, we see an upbeat mood, high self-esteem, task persistent, and cooperative. This is the type of characters we are nurturing and we will observe through this parenting style. What happens as they move into adolescence? Well, they're going to have a high self-esteem, they'll be social and moral, there'll be a sense of maturity and even academic achievement because they believe in themselves, they trust themselves, and they have a good relationship with the people, you know, that are the adults in their life. They know that they're heard, they know that they're respected, they know that they're seen, they know that they matter. So what happens when we look at the authoritarian style? Well, these children are obviously anxious and withdrawn. They tend to be unhappy, hostile when frustrated, and poor school performance. As they go into adolescence, we see that they are less adjusted than peers that are reared. Okay, the permissive style, so impulsive, disobedient, rebellious, demanding, and dependent on the adults. Poor persistence in task and performance, in school performance. Going into adolescence, poor self-control and school performance, defiance and antisocial behavior. And then our neglectful or our absent parents, so deficits in attachment. So we're looking at, sure, what we spoke about earlier, attachment theory and all of that with these kids when they're younger, this sense to need to connect and bond and know they're safe in relationship. So cognition, play, and emotional and social skills are all going to have these deficits as well. Poor emotional self-regulation, low academic self-esteem and school performance, antisocial behavior. So it really just paints the picture. You might be looking at yourself, looking at your spouse, looking at your classroom, and it might just need a time, or we need to offer ourselves a time to self-reflect and say, you know, is my very strict and harsh approach really going to, in the long run, be helpful? Is me being the fun parent who lets the child decide everything, is that going to be good? Me being the parent that says kids must be kids and just let them do whatever, you know, is that going to serve this child in their life? And of course, we can see the democratic disciplinary style is definitely the best style here to take a look at. So yes, as we draw to a close, I just want to remind people that resilient children become rebellious teenagers. And it doesn't need to be the case. You know, we often tell ourselves and we say, oh, these children are so resilient. And I am a firm believer that the children that we have are not resilient. Rather, they don't have the resources when they are younger to truly process and understand, as I've mentioned during this little crash course, to really understand what it is that they're going through and what it is that they should be feeling. And they're trying to make sense of the world. And while they're young, they really will do anything for love and acceptance. But as they get older and the brain is building and they have a better understanding, as I've said before, they look back on life and they start filling in the closing the dots, filling in the colors that they didn't perhaps have to do so early on. And they look back and they think, wow, these people, these parents, these adults in my life, they're not actually worth my respect and my attention and my affection. And, they have really perhaps bullied me or been quite hypocritical. And so now that I'm older and I am more powerful and I understand more, well, now I have the ability to push back and resist and stand up for myself and be opinionated. And so I think a good relationship with your teenager starts in the formative years, bonding with your children. Dr. Gabor Mate again explained that the first 3 years, if you can create a very loving, warm and supportive space for your children and a good relationship, that's where all this goodness is made. And that we don't necessarily have to be overly harsh and strict, because life is harsh, life is hard. And so when we show our children that we are supportive, that we're real, that we make mistakes and that we can apologize, and when we show them how to do it again by setting examples and giving them permission to be real people with real feelings, and afford that to them as we expect that to be afforded to ourselves, so we create a person who is really able to be real and consider things. So I'm reading from Life 101. This was written by Dr. Anthony Bass, and he gives this course called The Forum. Really, really powerful. And what has stood out for me as a teacher and as a movement facilitator and person who consults is this one little section here where he talks about these teenagers. And again, because we haven't had a chance in this crash course to really consider it. But at some point, children start deciding, am I loved? Am I accepted? Where do I fit in? How do I earn it? And who do I earn it from? And if I can't connect and respect the parents in my life, then guess what? I've got peers. And this is all taking place when their peers become more important than the adults. Why? Because they're forming their own little community. They're learning as teenagers how to fit into this new society, this new generation that they've created. And so you get the rebels. And the rebels like to think of themselves as independent. They have, in fact, merely adopted a knee-jerk reaction to whatever law is set before them. And so I'm reading word for word out of this book of Dr. Anthony Bass. They are prime candidates for reverse psychology. The best way to keep children from putting beans in their ears is to tell them to put beans in their ears. So this is the group that is pushing back. Most feared statement, a youth should be respected for respect his elders. And their slogan is authority. I tell you, you tell that we're no good. Well, authority is no good. Okay, and then of course there's far more to read. If you would like to read all of this, then you get the comfort junkies. So all that is or might be uncomfortable or avoidable, unless avoiding it would be more uncomfortable. And that might bring in comfort food, TVs, Walkmans, drinks, drugs, and other things. This is all sought after, unless seeking after them would be uncomfortable. So all about comfort, as you can hear. In their youth, the comfort junkies scoff French fries and then mature into couch potatoes. Their most feared statement, the scholar who cherishes the love of comfort is not fit to be deemed a scholar. Their slogan, comfort at all costs. Their motto, in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with ends of worms and oozy smells, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or to eat. It is a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. We then have the approval seekers, and I'm sure I'm missing one here, which I'll have to find for you. The best way to prove worthlessness is to have lots of people telling you how wonderful you are. Approval seekers work so hard for others' approval that they have little or no time to seek their own. But their own doesn't matter. This is the people I was talking about, all our little excellent ones. They, after all, are unworthy of what is worth. They are, after all, are unworthy. And what's the worth of an unworthy person's opinion? These people take the opposite tack of the rebels, and Rebels deem their opinions of others to be unworthy, while approval seekers deem others' opinions too worthy. Approval seekers would run for class president, but they're afraid of a backlash, so they usually win treasurer or by a landslide. Most feared statement: fine words and an insinuating appearance are seldom associated with true virtue. Slogan: what can I do for you today? And then I'm missing one, and this is called, I think, the Ha Kids. And I've got to find it for us, so give me 2 seconds, because I know quite a few of the Ha Kids. Oh gosh, and while I'm trying to find it, I just can't seem to find it. And so this is another little group of our little teenagers. Maybe I'm supposed to read on further here. And these children, just their answer to anything is huh. They actually know the answer, but the huh buys them time and possibly a step out from the situation, as somebody else will then fill in the gaps for them. And so again, we consider all these things today and start asking, what role do I have to play in this? You know, how do I look at the child as a whole, the person as a whole, and what's all going on in the body, in the brain, in the mind, in the belief system, in the structure of the environment, and how can I change it up and give these children the feedback they need to really build into their own sense of self, so that they too can reach self-actualization. So yes, I do teacher and parent consulting courses and workshops, as I've shared. I integrate primitive reflexes with movement programs. I'm a neurofeedback practitioner and help with goal setting and stress relief, as we use movement and visualization to change some of the programs and patterning that we've stored in the subconscious. So you are welcome to get in touch, or welcome to check out my website. And without further ado, I hope you all take care of yourself, be well, and we'll chat again soon.